Hello, everybody, and welcome to this podcast, Building for Peace with Hannah Jewell. Today we'll be discussing Kambo, a wonderful and powerful alternative medicine that's come to us in the West. We have with us Alan Schechner, a master practitioner and trainer of Kambo. I'm so excited to talk to him. His story is so incredible. Welcome to the podcast, Alan.
Hi, Hannah.
So, can you maybe tell us what Kambo is?
Sure. So Kambo is the secretion of a Amazonian frog whose Latin name is Philomedusa bicolor. The frog lives high up in the trees of the Amazon, maybe 30-40 meters up. It's nocturnal, it's arboreal, and as far as we know it has very few, if any, predators. The secretion is gathered by the various tribes, and they, for millennia, have used that as a medicine for three main things, really. One is they use it when they go hunting to give them strength and stamina, so as a performance enhancer. The second use is for physical illnesses. So in the context of the rainforest, that's going to be things like malaria, jungle fever, even some kinds of snake bites. They'll use the Kambo as a way to get the toxins out before they can do any damage. And the third use is this thing that they call panema, which translates as heavy or dense energy. Mm-hmm. So when things aren't in flow. So for us, that would be procrastination, that inner critic chattering away, laziness, depression. And so those are the primary uses of Kambo in the tribal context.
Oh, that's wonderful. I remember the first time I had Kambo after my first session. For several weeks afterwards, I just spoke my truth exactly as I felt it. And I had never had a sustained period of such absolute clarity and truth coming from me. I really appreciated this way.
My teacher, Karen Dark, used to call it the truth medicine. So if there was an aspect of your life that you weren't living truthfully, the Kambo would bring it up. The tribes call it the ordeal medicine. So that's another name for it, because it can be a challenging process at times. But yeah, that truth really resonates with me, because I think in my story, which we'll probably touch on a little bit later, it really kind of helped me change direction in life, and truthfulness and honesty was a big part of that transition for me.
So, Kambo is the medicine of a frog used across the rainforest for millennia for some specific purposes. Is that all across the rainforest, all through South America, or is that a certain area?
No, I mean the frogs live by water, so it tends to be the waterways of the Amazon, and it's the tribes that are located along those waterways. So the primary tribe to use it is a tribe called the Matses, sometimes called the cat people, because they have these quills that they decorate themselves with, that they insert into their face. And my teacher, when she first found Kambo, spent a number of years going from tribe to tribe, medicine woman to medicine man, different shaman, trying to look at the different ways that Kambo was used, because I think we think historically there's been about 70 tribes that have used it. Each tribe claimed to be the originator. So it could be that that's true, and at one stage they were one tribe that splintered for some reason, maybe conflict between them, maybe there just weren't enough resources to feed and everyone. So they all claim to be the originators, but every tribe has a slightly different way of working with the medicine. And so for her, when she first started this journey and set up the organization which I trained with, which is called the International Association of Kambo Practitioners, She wanted to get as firm a grounding as possible in all the different uses of the medicine, and also wanted to design a way of working with it which would be appropriate for a Western context, as we suffer from diseases and have access to substances, pharmaceutical and recreational, that the tribes wouldn't know about.
Exactly. And there is so much of this heaviness in the West that we're clearing. So that's always going to be a part of what's being cleared in addition to physical illness.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about Kambo, and we know a lot about it scientifically. So there was a guy in the mid-80s called Peter Gorman, who was a National Geographic photojournalist and also collected tribal artifacts for various museums in the States. And he was out in the rainforest and he came across the hunters of a tribe, and they were singing the frogs down from the trees. So like I said earlier, the frogs live at the top of these 30-40 meter high trees. So they go and sing the frogs down, and then the frogs kind of willingly come down, and then they gather the secretion off of the back of the frogs. The frogs aren't harmed in the process. The secretion is gathered and then they apply it. And so anyway, he witnessed this and said to them, like, who are you and what are you doing? And they said, well, we're hunters and this is what we do before a hunt to give us strength and stamina. They call it hunting magic. They believe it makes them invisible. And our understanding of that is that large doses of Kambo take their body odor away, so the animals wouldn't pick up on their scent. So that's what they mean by invisibility. And so he said, well, I want to try it. And so he negotiated with the chief, who allowed him to try the medicine, got an immediate boost in terms of focus and stamina and strength, and then spent the next, I think, 10 to 12 weeks continuing to work with them. And at the end of that time, again, negotiated with the chief to take 2 sticks of the medicine. The secretion is dried on these wooden sticks. So he negotiated to take 2, and he sent those to contemporaries of his in America who were working on medical research, and said, I've been taking this for the last few months. I feel amazing, both physically and emotionally. Can you look at what's in it? And so this is 1985, 1986. So the research really started there, and that research is still ongoing. There's currently, I think, 70 patents out on individual peptides in Kambo and their impact on the body. So one peptide, for example, might regulate blood pressure and be a pain reliever. So each one of those would be a separate patent. So it doesn't mean there's 70 peptides in it. So we know a lot about what it does from the physical perspective. So it's a very powerful pain reliever. One of the peptides alone, called dermorphin, is 40 times more powerful than morphine. And that's one of 4 or 5 peptides in the medicine that gives pain relief. We know it's a powerful anti-inflammatory, it's antibacterial, it works against yeast and fungal infections. It's an anti-cancer agent, in that it stops the supply of nutrition to tumours, and it causes cancer cells to self-destruct. So I know this, it kind of sounds too good to be true, but because there's the complex interaction of all these medicinal compounds on a physical level, it's really good for a whole range of different conditions. So I have clients with cancer, I have clients with autoimmune conditions, I have clients with addiction or chronic fatigue. I've got a lot of clients at the moment with long COVID, and it seems in all those cases to be beneficial. So that's what's happening on the physical level. And we've got that information from Western science, but there's some things that Western science doesn't ask because it doesn't believe they're possible.
Yeah.
So for example, the ability of the medicine to come into the physical body and find where there are blockages, where there's inflammation, where there's disease, and focus there. And that's happened to me so many times with clients. You know, clients who have a knee injury and the Kambo goes straight to the knees. Kambo's with arthritis and the Kambo goes straight to the arthritic joints. Recently I've had clients who have been vaccinated and the Kambo went straight to the point of vaccination. So it seems, and it's a strange thing to say about a frog secretion, but it seems to have a kind of intelligence on that physical level to locate disease, like I said, blockages, inflammation. In addition to that, it seems to be working on the spiritual and the emotional body as well. And the way I think about it is the physical is addressing the symptoms, but when it triggers an emotional release in a client, you know, I think of that as the underlying cause of the physical symptoms, whether that be an unresolved issue, trauma that's theirs, maybe ancestral. So Kambo seems to be working on those two levels at the same time. One is giving us relief from the physical, and at the same time working on whatever's underlying.
Yeah, I've experienced both of these qualities in my own sessions with Kambo, to feel it tracking through the system as the process begins, and only when that tracking completes does the next stage of the process go in. And not every time, but once I cried. I cried a lot. Whatever the Kambo was clearing, it was so powerful.
Yeah, I had that situation when I gave Kambo to my firstborn child. And they'd actually wanted to do Kambo because they had a shoulder issue. And they had some issue with the shoulder, some pain, and they thought it would be good for that. But what Kambo did is it triggered this kind of this well of grief, this whirlpool of grief. And they cried and they cried and they cried. And afterwards we talked about that, and they said what had come up for them was the suicide of a couple of friends when they'd been in high school. And that kind of unresolved grief was triggered, and they just released that, and that was their kind of real focus.
I find this with alternative medicine, across modalities, that we can address the symptom as it's presenting, and then a much deeper issue reveals itself. And this emotional, spiritual side of medicine is not currently really addressed by the allopathic models.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I find that, you know, I'll just give an example because it's the one that comes to mind. So people with autoimmune conditions, we get to a stage with the Kambo where we can give them significant relief from that condition, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks sometimes. But for example, someone with rheumatoid arthritis, after those 5 or 6 weeks, it will start to come back again. And you know, once we've reached that optimum length of relief that they can get, then I think there's the opportunity to have a chat with them and say, you know, we can either carry on like this, and I'll give you the Kambo every 5 or 6 weeks, and you'll be pain-free and mobile, or we can begin to look at what's going on underneath. And obviously that, you know, that can be challenging for some people, and it's, you know, it's completely up to them how they want to proceed with that. But once we start working on that emotional level, we can get really very profound results.
I'm curious about so many things, Alan. I'm curious about how Kambo sits within the alternative medicine model in general. We have many things like energy therapies like craniosacral and Reiki that have a profound physiological and emotional, spiritual impact. And we have all sorts of somatic and movement practices, and work with psilocybin is beginning. Where in this bigger field does Kambo find itself?
Yes, it's kind of difficult because it works on many levels. So on one level, it is a medicine in some ways like medicine, Western medicine, targeted at certain conditions. I suppose the big difference between Kambo and Western medicine is that the Western model is very much about suppressing symptoms, and Kambo is about releasing. And that might mean a physical release, purging, vomiting, sometimes going to the bathroom. Sometimes it will mean an emotional release, but it's very much about, one aspect of it is very much about releasing energetically. So there's an energy aspect to it, and it's not unusual to see clients shaking or yawning or crying, sometimes giggling, as they're healing the underlying traumas. And I think, if crying's about grief, this is very simplistic, but if crying's about grief and shaking's about releasing fear and laughter's about releasing humiliation and boredom, yawning is about releasing boredom, those things are happening alongside those medicinal compounds in the Kambo doing its work. So I see it partly as somatic. People also sometimes get insights, so it's not a hallucinogen. It isn't illegal because of that. It's probably the last of the Amazonian medicines that's still legal, or one of the few. But it's not unusual for people to have insights, usually immediately after. The process itself is very physical, very much in the body. It's very hard to think, very much. Sometimes it's hard to hold on to an intention, if you had an intention coming into the ceremony. So it's a strange hybrid, I would say, of somatic in that you're releasing, energetic in that you're releasing, but also we know that there are powerful medicinal compounds at work, working on physical ailments. There are bioactive peptides working on our body, but also neuropeptides, peptides crossing the blood-brain barrier, triggering the opioid receptors in our brain. So it's physical, neural, energetic, somatic.
And spiritual.
And spiritual, of course.
Yeah.
It is a hard one to label, though, I think.
Because not everything can be classified in the boxes that Western models have set forth. So and as our healthcare systems change, we're going to find more and more hybrid ways of working, I feel, because people's needs are so complex right now, and they need to be addressed in multiple ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked a little bit about what Kambo feels like, and you just mentioned that it's a ceremony when people come to you. So if we are going to try Kambo, and we haven't before, what does that look like? How does a person make use of this medicine?
Okay. So the first stage in the process really would to be ensure that they aren't contraindicated, or to find out if they have any conditions that may make Kambo potentially, we call them cautions. So potentially there are things that maybe we need to investigate a little bit more before receiving Kambo. And there are a number of those, not a huge amount, so 95+% of people can take Kambo safely, but there are certain people that can't. So people with certain heart conditions, things like bypass surgery, people who've had a stroke, brain injuries, because one of the things that Kambo does is it causes vasodilation, so your blood pressure is going to go up, and at one stage in the process you will feel the blood pumping through your veins. You might feel some pulsing in your ear, so it's in some ways the equivalent of a cardiovascular process. And if you aren't able to do cardiovascular exercise, or you have a condition where that extra pressure may cause problems, so for example bypass surgery, there's going to be a weakness where the new artery has been created, and so with the pressure of the vasodilation going through the body, that could potentially cause that to rip. It's highly unlikely, but my organisation, well, I think that we feel that obviously safety is primary. We also feel that Kambo isn't an emergency medicine. For most people it's not going to be a life or death decision to take Kambo. So we want to ensure that everyone is safe. And I suppose the second thing, we see ourselves as guardians of the medicine. So if we give Kambo to someone who's contraindicated and then something potentially happens, that doesn't just impact that client, it doesn't just impact us as a personal practitioner, but it has the potential to negatively impact access to Kambo in this country, potentially globally. So we want to ensure that. So contraindications and cautions first. That's usually through a chat. I send out a PDF with information. Then when the person turns up, they need to have fasted, usually for 8 to 10 hours beforehand, simply because Kambo is a purgative, so most people are going to vomit, and if you have solids in your system, that's going to be more uncomfortable than otherwise. We would sage them, we would open up ceremonial space, invite the spirit of Kambo in, and then I would usually do a small consultation. If it's in a group, I do both group and individual treatments. So if it's in a group, I would obviously say to people, you don't need to reveal anything you don't want to reveal, and actually you don't even need to tell me what your intention is if you don't want to. That can be something that you keep to yourself. But if they are willing to, and almost everyone is, we'll explore a little bit about why they're there today, if there's a specific condition, when that started, you know, was there something else going on in their life at the same time? Is it a condition that we see through their genetic line, their ancestral line? Is it something that's been passed on? Just to try and get a sense of what the underlying root issue might be, as well as what the symptoms are. And then if you're coming to me for the first time, we honour the tribal tradition, which is historically the left-hand side, the left-hand arm for men, so the Kambo is applied here, and for the women it's the lower right leg. That's the tribal tradition, so we honour that. Once we've gone through that process of the consultation, the client then starts drinking, and this is for many people the most challenging things. We suggest drinking between 1.5 litres to 2 litres of water in about 15 minutes. So that's quite a lot of water, and the reason we want that is one of the things that happens with Kambo is when it goes into the body, our cells have these cell receptors around them, so they're like locking devices that open and close. So if something comes into the body that's synthetic, that the body doesn't recognize, then the cells have these locking mechanisms around them to stop this entering into the cells. So for example, you know, pharmaceutical medicine, the pharmaceutical comes in, the cell won't recognize it because it's not a natural compound, so the cell receptor will close, and then the pharmaceutical often to get in needs to break through the cell membrane. And because the cell's locked over time, sediment, if you like, of these different substances that may be pharmaceutical, they may be recreational, they may be environmental toxins, heavy metals, pollution, chlorine crap in the water. So over time these build up and they create cell toxicity, which is often the root cause of many of our diseases. When the Kambo comes into the body, the cell receptors stay open, so they recognize the various peptides and alkaloids in the Kambo as being similar to the peptides and the alkaloids that we're made of. So then the Kambo can go in and start detoxifying at a cellular level. All those toxins are released, so we need something to bring them out. So that's what the water is. The water is the vehicle to release those toxins. So they drink. While they're drinking, I make some burns. So the Kambo is applied through the skin. So we take an unperfumed incense stick, we light it, we touch it very lightly to the skin, and we just take off that top layer of skin. Don't draw blood or anything, we're just trying to reveal the epidermis, because the Kambo is sucked through the epidermis into the lymphatic system, and it's the lymphatic system that takes it around the body. So I would, initially working with someone for the first time who hasn't been contraindicated or cautioned and is healthy, relatively healthy, I would make 3 of these burns, we call them gates, and once they had drunk the 1.5 to 2 litres of water, I would apply 1 point of the Kambo. So the Kambo secretion is dried on sticks, so we rehydrate it with some water, and I would apply 1 of those to one of those gates, one of those burns, and that's what we call a test point. So for the client, it allows them to experience the energy of Kambo entering their system without having the full dose initially. And usually what that means is a little bit of stinging at the place where the medicine is being sucked into the lymphatic system, and then very quickly, for most people 90 seconds to a couple of minutes they'll start to feel it, and that will be increased heart rate, what feels like a hot flush coming into the face, so it's almost like some kind of internal heating system has been switched on, maybe some pulsing in the ears, and that will build in intensity, plateau, and then start to drop. So the heat drops, the blood pressure drops. That 1 point experience for most people is very pleasant.
It's warming and it feels delightful.
It feels lovely. In the higher doses, as the blood pressure drops, it can you start to feel nauseous often. Not everyone, different people respond to it differently, but in general that's the case. So based on the test point, I will be monitoring how they respond to it and coming up with an appropriate dosage. The reason we make 3 gates to start with is that for most people, most healthy people, 3 people is going to be a minimum dose. So if they've had that flush, and I would have seen that, they would have gone very red. If it had been strong, if it had come on quickly, if they'd felt the pulsing in the ears, that's the sign for me that they've responded strongly to the test point, and then I can just apply the additional 2 points of medicine. If the response wasn't that strong, so it took longer to come on, the flush wasn't that as intense, that's a sign for me that we're going to need more than 3 gates. So at that stage I would burn any additional gates. And then for a normal treatment, there's a range of different ways that we can apply it, but for a normal treatment at that stage we would apply the rest of the medicine. Again, within a minute or 2, the heart rate's going to go up, they're going to feel this heat and tension, it's going to elevate and elevate till it plateaus, then it's going to drop, and it's at that stage when it's dropping people usually start to feel the need for some kind of release. Now that release may be emotional, so people might start crying. I had a ceremony yesterday where there were a lot of tears being released. That might be physical in terms of beginning to purge that water out with any of the toxins that have been released from the body. Sometimes people need to purge the other way and they need to go to the bathroom. Yeah. And then for the next 20 minutes or so, what we often have are waves of nausea, some kind of release, physical or emotional, or sometimes both. And with that release, often the intensity of the medicine goes down, and then it starts to build again. So in a 20-minute process, it wouldn't be unusual for people to have maybe 3 or 4 waves of nausea. And we're very careful with water consumption. There is a condition called hypernatremia, which is excessive water consumption, that we saw back in the days of acid house, when people were supposedly dying of ecstasy, but in many cases what they were dying of was consuming so much water that their cells in their bodies couldn't absorb anymore, and then it went to the brain cells and caused them to swell, and that would then trigger brain hemorrhages and kidney issues, heart attacks and things like that. So we're very careful on the water consumption. So we would go up to a maximum of 3 litres as long as the person was purging well. And I've got these 5-litre buckets and 3-litre jugs, so I can measure everything.
How much has
gone in,
versus
how much has come out.
Yeah.
And then once we hit the 20-minute mark, for most people, it's done. The medicine simply stops.
Yeah.
All of the peptides that have needed to be absorbed have been absorbed. I would remove the medicine, client would lay down and just rest. Yeah. So give them a blanket, just let them rest. Sometimes that will be 10-15 minutes, but sometimes it'll be up to an hour, depending on how deep the process has been. And often in that resting period is when, if there are going to be insights, they happen there. Personally, one of the things I love about Kambo is often there aren't insights.
Yeah.
And all I know is that I feel better, and something that I was carrying has been released. Something dark, something that wasn't mine, something that was burdensome. And not knowing exactly what it is can, for me anyway, as someone who can end up re-traumatizing themselves over the things that have been revealed to them, for me it's a great blessing.
Right.
But other people will get insights, and there have been times as well where I got insights into what it is that's been released, shame or guilt or fear or whatever it might be. At the end of that process, once they've rested, we have a cup of tea, because we're English, and that's what we do. And once they've had some tea, I'll offer them 2 other medicines. And these are medicines that are taken by the tribes in combination with Kambo when they're hunting. So one is a tobacco snuff called hape, and the other one is an eye drop called sananga. And in the tribal context, the sananga is taken to improve the physical eyesight of the hunters, to make them more aware. I'm looking out here at all the greenery, so if there's a monkey or a parrot that they're hunting, that they can see that clearly against the green background. It's also used for chronic pain, eye conditions, so things like photophobia or short-sightedness, and it's also very good for sinus-related issues. And so they would take that in combination with the Kambo, and then they would take large doses of this snuff, tobacco-based snuff called hape, and they believe in large doses they start to have visions. They believe that the animals that they're hunting, they meet them on that spirit realm, and the animals are willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of the tribe. And so they meet them there, and they then say, oh, where did we meet them? We met them at such and such a glade, and it looked like it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon from where the sun was. So we'll start our hunt tomorrow at 4 o'clock at that location. So those are so the clients will take those. We don't take huge doses, so there's no hallucinating, and there's not usually any hunting involved after the after a treatment.
Too bad.
It's a shame, isn't it? It's a shame. And then I will dress the wounds. So we have a tree sap called dragon's blood. Got one there. Gave myself a point recently. That scabs over and acts like a plaster. It's also anti-inflammatory. So obviously with the open burns, we want to make sure that they don't get infected. We'll close the circle, and then we'll have some soup, which is always the high point. Then the Kambo is in the client system. It has a half-life of about 24 hours. So that next 24 hours is often interesting. Sometimes, because we said earlier, it's not a medicine that suppresses, it's a medicine that releases. So sometimes that can lead to a small healing crisis. So for example, my clients with arthritis often talk about the joints that are inflamed feel more inflamed, maybe for a short period of time, until the benefits start to kick in. But for most people, they'll either get that hunter energy, so they'll want to go out and run and go for a swim and be in nature and do stuff, or it will take them into a quieter, more meditative place, and they decide just to go home and meditate, have a little nap, and have some self-care for the rest of that day. And then I will touch base the next day, because usually it's in the 24 to 48 hours afterwards that we start to see how the Kambo's worked. And sometimes it works in very interesting ways. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward. I came with pain and now my pain is gone. And sometimes it can be very complex. And the story that comes to mind is a client who came to see me for ketamine addiction. And she was told that it wouldn't be possible for her to have children. That's kind of a side issue. We gave her the Kambo. She went through the process. She went home that evening, had sex with a partner, and became pregnant. And it was becoming pregnant that got her off of ketamine.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's like...
what an incredible blend of the physical, emotional, spiritual, all being touched there. Oh, what a touching story. And shows us how these medicines work on such an individual basis, and why we feel that they have an intelligence to them, that synthetic medicines it's just not possible for them to have that kind of intelligence. Even though the process can be challenging, no one likes vomiting, no one likes feeling bad. The benefits for most people have been so profound, and this is my personal experience with Kambo, but also the experience of my clients. It's so profound, they're willing to put themselves through 20 minutes, 25 minutes of discomfort, because the benefits far outweigh anything else. Yeah, absolutely. And the discomfort is nothing compared to having surgeries and other things. We regularly put ourselves through discomfort to reap health benefits that we need. So
I suppose it's part of a long tradition in natural medicines, both from the Amazon but also from Europe, of the use of purgatives. To get stuff out.
There are many purgatives. In the Amazon there's different leaves you can drink that have absolutely no psychoactive or other physical effect other than they just cause you to purge. Even high doses of lemongrass water will do this. I'm curious, Alan, again, about how this medicine has really been made to integrate with the West. you mentioned your organization, its practices for contraindications, and the guidance. And I know that in the trainings you offer, it's a pretty rigorous process that a student undergoes before they're able to give a Kambo application to clients themselves. And as with any alternative medicine that's coming into the West right now, there are people using it in a huge variety of ways. I get lots of different stories, and some of these ways might have similarities to some of the tribal ways. Sometimes people are making things up on their own. It's a complex arena we're in right now as our healthcare systems start to shift. So, can you talk to us about the integration of Kambo into the Western mentality, the Western way of life, and the organization you're part of, maybe part of that?
Okay. Well, I suppose the first thing was, and I said this earlier, was the primacy of ensuring that the medicine stays legal, and that it's used safely, ethically, and with integrity. So a large part of the training that our students go through, our practitioners in training go through, is actually dealing with the stuff that's coming up for them. So as well as learning to apply the medicine, as learning first aid, learning something of the origins and the history of science, the history of Kambo, and also learning about scientifically what's happening, they're also going through a process themselves. And in my experience, what the intelligence of the medicine does is it brings up the issues that are going to get in the way of them being the best practitioner they can be. So for someone who has control issues, dealing with a medicine like this, they're going to need to have to work through those control issues in order to allow their client to go through that process. Obviously we're there to support them, we're there to keep them safe, but we're not shamans. It's not a shamanic medicine, in that you don't need a shaman who is going to other dimensions and negotiating those. So in that way, it's a very singular process between the medicine and the individual taking it, and it's our job to keep them safe through that process. Substance guidelines. So, for example, we have a ever-growing list of Kambo in relation to other substances. Those can be pharmaceutical, they can be synthetic recreational, they can be other kinds of plant medicines or animal medicines like bufo and iboga. And so we've got very clear guidelines about, if I take Kambo on Monday and I'm going to start some medication, some pharmaceutical medication, when can I safely do that? Or if I've had the medication beforehand, when can I safely take Kambo? So there's safety guidelines there. We have water guidelines as well. So very clear water guidelines that nothing apart from electrolytes can be added to the water, and a very clear limitation on how much people can drink, depending if they're doing one treatment, a double treatment, a triple treatment. There are different levels going on there. And then I think very simple things like the drinking of water and the purging. Not all the tribes do that. Many of the tribes take Kambo dry. Yeah, they take Kambo dry. There are various theories about why that might be. One is that clean water was a commodity that couldn't be wasted just by purging out, so they had to look after their water supplies. Some tribes talk about Kambo as a fire medicine, burning out. Now, if you take it dry, you might want to try it. I wouldn't recommend it. I've tried it. What tends to happen is, because the toxins are released, there's nothing in the body to bring them up, so it tends to go the other way.
Yeah.
And so in the context of the Amazon rainforest, what people tend to do is they sit down outside their hut and let nature take its course. A seafront apartment in Hove, where I hold my ceremonies, that's probably not the most appropriate way to work. And also, it's just those kind of cultural contexts.
Yeah.
So what we've tried to do is we've tried to do our best to honour the tribal traditions, but at the same time have had to adapt to a Western context, what's going to be acceptable, what people are taking in terms of medications, supplements, pharmaceuticals, etc. All those elements have had to be brought in to be able to ensure continued safety. And we have a code of ethics, because, and I'm sure you'll know this, but unfortunately, the medicine world isn't separate from the rest of the world. It's just another aspect of it, and a lot of the issues around, for example, misogyny and sexism and inappropriate sexual behaviour that or discrimination that happen in the outside world also make their way into the medicine world. So it's really important for us as an organisation that we have a code of ethics and that people are held to that. We also have a complaints procedure, pretty much like any organisation would, where if something untoward happens or a client feels that there's been some inappropriate behaviour, then we will go through an independent investigation and try and get to the bottom of what's happened. So I suppose all those safeguards are in place for us as an organisation. And there are, we're not the only Kambo organisations, there are other ones out there. Everyone's got their own slightly different flavour. But if you are thinking of doing Kambo, I think it's really important that you do your due diligence and look into the organisation and make sure that you're comfortable with their way of working. So for example, we don't touch the clients.
Yeah.
So that would be one example. Well, obviously when we apply the medicine we do, occasionally a client will faint, so if they faint, obviously I'm going to catch them and put them in the recovery position, and so in situations like that. But when a client's through the process, we're not going to touch them, because we don't know what their history is, what their traumas are, and we don't know under the influence of the medicine how that might be interpreted or misinterpreted. So that would be another example, I suppose. Very careful about how we hold space in a way that's respectful, and do our best to ensure that our clients have the best experience possible.
Yeah, what's coming to mind as you say this is like the use of certified trainings, organizations, etc. are in place and actually are necessary in the West, because we live in these sort of vast autonomous systems, and we're not within a community where everything is seen by the others in the community, and there might be other elders holding the space as well, energetically, before and after, and your history is known by your neighbors who've also had Kambo or seen you had Kambo. Without that kind of network around us, the organizational aspect of this provides some sense of safety for people.
Yeah, and it also provides a tribe. So we're an international organisation. I think there's between 500 or 600 practitioners at the moment, spread across the globe. But we, using various online forums, we can share information with each other. We've gathered a huge archive of useful information as clients come across certain conditions or certain medications that they haven't come across before, and that we've got kind of like a mini encyclopedia now for new practitioners to access once they join the organisation. So that that the knowledge that would historically be held by the elders in a tribal context is, I mean, I'm not pretending we're the same, but it is being replicated to some extent using new technologies and sharing. And next year, because we're a global organisation, we don't get to meet each other very much.
Yeah.
But next year's the 10th anniversary of the organisation, so maybe there'll be some opportunities to share face to face as well. Yeah.
Okay, Alan, I really want to know, and I want our listeners to know how you got into Kambo. It's such a fantastic story.
Okay, it's an interesting one. I was in quite a dark place in my life. I'd been an academic, so an artist initially, who then went to teach fine art, and then was headhunted into a managerial position in the university, the higher up I got within the organisation, and the higher my pay went, the less happy I was getting. And I ended up in a situation where I was working at a university 200 miles from where I was living. I wasn't seeing my kids, I wasn't seeing my partner at the time. All kinds of tensions emerged from that. I was carrying out government agendas in terms of higher education that no longer resonated with what I'd signed up for initially. And I just found myself getting darker and darker and darker and darker. I mean, I didn't go to see a doctor, but had I gone to see a doctor, I'm sure they would have put me on kind of antidepressants pretty quickly. But what I did is I lost hope. I lost hope in life, really. And I just saw this long, steady decline that would culminate in my death. That was the image that I was carrying. So I decided at this time, because I wasn't seeing my kids very much, that I was going to go on a father-son bonding holiday to the Czech Republic with my son. And we had a great time. We spent a lot of time hiking in nature, living off the land. We were plums and grapes and apples. We at the end of the week, I said, you know what, we spent £25 a week. Let's splash out, find a nice restaurant somewhere, and we'll have one proper meal while we're here in Prague. And so I phoned up, made an appointment, was told I'd have to share a table because that was the only space available. So I said fine. And of course, the person I was sharing the table with had recently finished the Kambo practitioner training. And we started talking, and initially my response was, oh no, it's our last night and we've got the loony on our table, we've got the lunatic here talking about frog secretion and burning and vomiting. But then as he shared his story, it was like he was holding up a mirror to me. Like his story was my story. I mean, the industry was different, but the story of losing yourself somewhere, losing connection to your heart, was exactly the same. And then he told me that Kambo had been so profound for him that he'd signed up to go to the Kambo practitioner training, and the training was amazing, but he got a really clear vision that Kambo shouldn't be his main focus, and that he'd always loved working with wood, and it's something he'd put aside for his career, and he should go back to that. So when we met, he was on his way to the north of Sweden to study with a master furniture maker. He was going to do a 5-year apprenticeship. Wow. And I kind of feel in retrospect that he was handing the baton over to me. I didn't realise it at the time. I just got
goosebumps all over my entire body.
Yeah. So anyway, I left that meal still a little bit sceptical. I hadn't done anything like this before. I'd been an artist, so I'd experimented with drugs and things like that, but nothing like this, and I hadn't really been engaged with alternative or complementary medicines at all. So So I got home and I thought about it, and a month went by, and then another month, and then another month, and I thought, you know what, nothing's going to improve here unless I try this. So I contacted him. I said, where's the nearest practitioner? At the time, I think there were just 2 or 3 practitioners in the UK. And the nearest one was in Bristol. So I drove the 200 miles from Brighton to Bristol. I don't remember much about it because I fainted. I actually fainted the first 7 times I had Kambo. It turns out I had low blood pressure that I didn't know about. And it took 7 treatments for the blood pressure to regulate. But then when it did regulate, I hadn't fainted since. So I fainted. I don't remember much about it. I remember the woman, Shivani, was lovely, held beautiful space, very nurturing space. And I had a banana and some soup, and then I left. I was driving back. And on that drive back, I got this sense that what the tribes call panema, that heavy, dense energy that I'd been carrying had gone. And then I thought, wow, it's amazing. And I woke up the next morning and it didn't come back, and then the morning after that. And for me, and I can't guarantee this is going to be for everyone, but for me it never came back.
Wow.
And what I took from that was the Kambo knew I was highly skeptical, and if it didn't do something profound first time, I wasn't coming back. And it had plans for me. That's not my understanding of it. So I remember going home and thinking, like, what was that? I don't know what it was. I've got no idea what happened, but I feel so much better and so much lighter than I did going there. So I booked another ceremony for the next month, about 4 weeks later. And in the second ceremony, I must have been, 52 or 53 at the time. All the aches and pains that I put down to being 52 or 53 went. So I had a tennis elbow and I had a bad wrist, and one of my knees and one of my ankles was a bit iffy. I play a lot of racket sports, and they all went like that. So I thought, at the end, I remember coming home and thinking, I'm going to sign up for the training.
Yeah.
Not thinking I was going to leave my job. Just thinking, this stuff, whatever it is amazing, and I need to know more about it, and I'll be able to treat myself, and I'll be able to treat the people I love, my friends and family, and that was as far as it went, really. So I signed up for the training. In order to train with us, you need to experience Kambo 6 times prior, so I did another 4 treatments where I fainted every time with Shivani, and then went to the training, and life-changing 2 weeks. Something really very profound happened, and I began to realise that what Kambo was doing is it was opening a door for me, so getting me in a really good place, giving me a really good version of myself, and from there I could look at what was going on in my life and then start to make changes. Kambo wasn't going to do all the work. It's not a miracle in that way, but it will give you a time limited window where you're coming from a really good place, a really heart-centered place, like I say, a really good version of yourself, and then you can start implementing the changes that you need to implement in your life. I'm coming back from the training. I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to the university. I spoke to my partner at the time, who was worried for finances. I spoke to my boss at the time, who thought I was having a midlife crisis. So his suggestion was, why don't we do 6 months where you go part-time, so 0.5 university and 0.5 Kambo. So I did that, and it was like the worst 6 months of my life, because the university half of the week was spreadsheets and budget cuts and potential redundancies and complaints and all that. And then the Kambo half of the week was amazing. You know, people were coming to me and leaving feeling better.
Yeah.
And I got so much, and I know it's not that's the medicine doing the work. I'm there holding the space, and you know, I try and add where I can. I know it's not me who's doing the healing, the medicine is, but just to be in a situation where all you get is positive feedback, I'd never experienced that before. And that in its way has been really, really profound. And that was it. You know, after that crazy 6 months, I just said, I'm going to leave. I learned a huge lesson that, you know, and it's a frog-like lesson that involves leaping. You know, that you need to make that leap of faith. Otherwise nothing changes. Otherwise I would still be sitting at the university now. So I made that leap of faith and I left the university, and as soon as I left, the safety net appeared. So within a month money wasn't an issue. I wasn't making as much as I'd made at the university, but I was making enough for us to live, and to live well, and to cover our expenses. So that took, I think, some of the fear away from my partner at the time. And yeah, that's the story. And then from there, I did an advanced training 18 months later. Advanced training is very much focused on working with chronic illnesses and addiction, and getting a deeper understanding of how we work alongside pharmaceuticals. Sometimes if people want to wean themselves off pharmaceuticals, to do that. So I did that. Then I went straight into the master training program. The master training program is 4 case studies, where basically you track someone for a year with different conditions and you write up the case studies. Went from that into the teacher training, and I've been teaching for the last 4 or 5 years, which I love.
Yeah, you're such a fabulous teacher. Yeah, and I know in the Kambo sessions that I've had with you, you just have this uncanny ability to pull out what needs to be pulled out. You're not doing the work the medicine is, but you're really good at talking to people. And that combination is really wonderful. Yeah. So you're using, I find that people working in alternative healthcare and with medicines especially, the skills that we've developed prior are utilized by the medicine.
Yeah. Because you have a background in higher education too.
Yes, I do.
So I never thought I would utilize those skills, but actually, you know, it's great, you know. It's like when you look back at your life and you see the tapestry of your life being woven, and you suddenly realize, oh, that's why I did that workshop, and that's why I was interested in co-counselling, and that's, you know, that's why I became a university lecturer or whatever it might be. Thankfully, my spreadsheet skills don't need to be used too much anymore. But, yeah.
It's just been so wonderful talking with you, Alan. Is there anything I haven't asked that feels really important to share about Kambo, or that you want to share right now?
I mean, there's a little bit maybe around the origins of Kambo.
Yeah.
In the origin story, and I think it's from the Katukina tribe, and they talk of this shaman called Kampun, and we think that maybe that's where the name Kambo comes from, who had a village of sick people, and he tried all the plant medicines he knew and nothing was working. So the origin myth is he then drank ayahuasca, and in his ayahuasca journey his question was, how do I heal the village? And the frog appeared. The frog appeared in his vision, showed him how to gather the medicine, showed him how to apply the medicine, and then he took that back to the tribe and healed his village. So that, I think, is kind of an interesting story, just in terms of how they knew.
Yeah, exactly. How we access healing and how we prepare ourselves to be healers are very different in this model than in an allopathic model. When we have students who go through an allopathic method of training, there is zero emphasis on their own transformational journey, their own process. They may even have their own illnesses that aren't even properly being addressed or healed. And so we have people who some develop empathy, some don't, some heal themselves, some don't, but there's not a concept that I, as the practitioner, have gone on a healing journey myself, and that this transmission of healing is being passed.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's key, I think. I think the minute I stop taking Kambo will be the minute I stop administering Kambo. And that's even if sometimes I don't feel like I need it, but because it can be a challenging process. If I'm going to hold space for people going through that process, I need to constantly remind myself how challenging that can be. Otherwise I can't really hold the space. And I'm full of admiration for people who do it. It's never an easy choice, because you on some level are facing your shadows, you're facing your demons, you're facing the parts of yourself that you've pushed aside. And with the visionary medicines, that's often revealed through hallucinations, visions. With Kambo, I think it's more somatic. I think we're releasing, I've got no scientific evidence for this is just my hypothesis, but I've seen it so often that we are releasing on a physical level trauma that's held in the body. So we don't need the visions, because that's, and you see it through shaking, you see it through tears. I mean, I've seen amazing things. I've seen I've seen people reliving experiences in order to release, and the Kambo has triggered that in them.
Isn't there a Socratic or Platonic, or from this area of medical history, an axiom known as "healer, heal thyself"?
Absolutely.
And somehow that's gotten lost. And that's what's coming back to me right now, is the healer must heal thyself. And that's not a one-time thing. It's actually continuous, and that's the only way integrity is maintained.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I might have done a really good job in holding space, and I might have done a really good consultation, but it wasn't me doing the healing. I was holding the space for the client to heal. And it sounds weird because it's about people vomiting, but witnessing people's healing is the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. Being honoured with them allowing me to witness their process, and for them to be vulnerable, knowing that they're safe, is very profound, very beautiful.
Yeah, there are just layers of trust and reciprocity and care embedded in this work. And while it may seem harsh at the outset, you get burned, you vomit, actually all of those qualities being an integral part of the work really differentiate it for me, and make it truly a special gem that we have at our use right now. One last question, Alan, is that sometimes I hear from people that we should be careful about our use of Kambo because we might overuse the medicine as the Western mentality would do. Is there a danger of there not being enough tree frogs that produce Kambo in existence? Do they have enough habitat? Are we over harvesting? Is this an issue we should be considering?
I think it's always something to be aware of. Currently, the frog is not on any endangered list. The major threat to it is the deforestation of the Amazon. But because the frog isn't harmed in the process, so that's one issue. They also have a very interesting way of mating and creating new little frogs. So what the male does is it creates a cone-shaped nest made of leaves, and it uses the Kambo secretion to stick the leaves together, and it builds that on a branch over a water rivulet or the river, and the female then lays the fertilized eggs in this cone, and then as the eggs turn to tadpoles, into little froglets, obviously it gets heavier and heavier until at some stage it bursts open and the frogs drop fully formed into the water. So if you compare that to seeing frogs spawn in the side of a lake here in Sussex, where most of it gets eaten by newts or foxes, they've got a very high survival rate there. And also the tribes don't gather the medicine during the mating season, which is the rainy season, usually December, January, February, March. So for 3 to 4 months of the year, when the frogs are procreating, the tribes withdraw and just let them go on with it.
So then the secretions are available to make the nest,
Yeah.
to help the mating process.
Yeah.
And so really, if we want to ensure the use of Kambo as a possible alternative modality here in the West, the main thing we can do is reinforce the habitat of the frogs, and to work with tree planting and the economic survival of the peoples in those areas, so that more deforestation doesn't need to happen, etc.
So one of the things that the organisation has done is it's set up a cooperative with the Matsi tribe, because what was happening, they want the same crap as we do. They want the same cell phones, and they want a Cristiano Ronaldo T-shirt and whatever you Taylor Swift album, whatever it is that they want. And so what was happening is the young men were leaving the villages. They're quite isolated, but there are some army bases peppered around. So they were doing the most kind of lowest level menial work. Some of the younger women were selling themselves into prostitution around the army bases. So what we have now, through setting up this collective, is a situation where collecting Kambo is significantly more lucrative than those other things, so that they can now maintain their tribal traditions and generate the income that they want to.
I've got the goosebumps all over my whole body again. So
that's one thing we do as an organisation. We also support other charities. So there's one charity called Akate that works specifically with the Matsi tribe, and they do a whole range of things, from supporting the physical habitat, but also they put together an encyclopedia in the Matsi's language of all their medicines, so that whatever happens, they will have that. They've also put together educational materials for the kids, not in Spanish, but in their tribal language. So trying to reinforce those kind of cultural aspects that could potentially get lost through assimilation.
Yeah, this has been such an incredibly rich conversation, and we're actually only moving into some of those deeper questions here as we close, but perhaps sometime we can do a follow-up.
Yeah,
I'd like
that.
That'd be delightful. If our listeners would like to access some of the research that's been done on Kambo, or to access the charities that they might support with the culture and the habitat, or to access your organization, would you be happy to share those links, and I'll put them in the comments?
Yeah, sure. No problem at all.
And are you welcoming new patients or new clients if anyone would like to come and train with you?
Clients and training are two different things.
Yeah.
So yeah, both clients and trainees, will be fine. I'm busy for the next month or so until the end of September with trainings. But then I'll be available for ceremonies, either one-on-one or group.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, Alan, it's always a joy to see you, and thank you so much for sharing your incredible wealth of knowledge and your heart with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It's been a joy sharing this time with you. Do be in touch if you'd like to share your story or talk to me about anything that's arisen in this podcast. Much love.